All right, diving right in today, with your faith and all, I bet you've wondered this too. How do we actually know St. Peter is buried under the altar in St. Peter's Basilica, down there in the Necropolis? It's a huge question, right at the heart of things. We're going to look at all the evidence, the traditions, the whole shebang.
It's a question that resonates with, well, pretty much every Catholic. The Bible tells us Peter was the rock, the foundation of the church, all that. But for the specifics of his death and burial, we need to look beyond Scripture, into history, and honestly, some pretty amazing archaeology.
Yeah, St. Peter's itself, talk about a central point of faith. And thinking about what might be right underneath, well, it's captivating. So, okay, first things first. The early church. After that council in Jerusalem, Acts 15, Peter's kind of in the background, biblically speaking.
Right. His role in those early Jerusalem days in Acts, that's undeniable. But as the story moves on, it's more about Paul's journeys, all across the Roman Empire. It doesn't mean Peter stopped ministering, though. There are hints in Scripture that suggest what he was up to.
And one of the biggest hints, I'm thinking 1 Peter 5.13, she who is at Babylon sends you greetings. Now, Babylon, that's not literally ancient Mesopotamia, is it?
Most definitely not. In early Christian writings, and for scholars, Babylon here, it's code. Code for Rome. This kind of thing was common, especially when Christians were persecuted. So a simple greeting, but it puts Peter and Mark with him, right there in Rome. Powerful stuff, even if it's indirect.
It's like a breadcrumb trail leading us toward Rome. But beyond the Bible, we have these incredible early church figures, basically the generation after the apostles. Clement of Rome, for example, his letter around 96 AD. That's barely any time after Peter would have died.
Barely any time at all. Clement, he was the bishop of Rome himself. And tradition says he might have known Peter, or at least lived very soon after him. Anyway, his letter to the Corinthians, it mentions Peter and Paul's martyrdom. Like flat out. They're examples for the Romans. Now, he doesn't give details of how Peter died there, but the meaning is clear. Peter ministered in Rome, died in Rome.
Wow, someone who might have actually met Peter confirming this. Pretty strong stuff. And then there's Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 110 AD. He sent letters to different churches, including Rome, but his letter to the Romans, there's something odd about it, isn't there?
Totally. In every other letter, Ignatius greets the local bishop, the leader, but not in the one to Rome. And that's led a lot of historians to think, well, maybe the Roman Church was in a weird spot then. Maybe Peter had just died, and no clear successor was in place yet. Silence speaks volumes.
A silent clue, but a big one. Now let's jump ahead to Irenaeus of Lyons, around 180 AD. By this point, the story of Peter in Rome is crystal clear.
It really is. Irenaeus, in his book Against Heresies, he says it in Adaris, Peter and Paul founded the Roman Church together. They even appointed Linus as the first bishop. Irenaeus writes, quote, Matthew also issued a written gospel while Peter and Paul were preaching in Rome and laying the foundations of the church. Super clear from a major theologian less than 200 years after Peter.
This chain of witnesses, each one adding another piece to the picture. And last but not least, Eusebius of Caesarea, 4th century, a guy who basically compiled a history of everything.
Yeah.
What does he say about Peter in Rome?
So, in his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius uses a bunch of older sources. Some are lost now, sadly. He talks about Peter coming to Rome, preaching with success, being the bishop there, and then martyrdom under Nero. It's like he brings all the pieces together based on everyone who came before him, Peter's ministry, Peter's death, all in Rome. A clear picture, no doubt about it.
Okay, so putting it all together, that maybe coded message in 1 Peter, then Clement, Ignatius's weird silence, and then Irenaeus and Eusebius being super direct. It paints a consistent picture, don't you think? By the 2nd century, it seems everyone believed Peter went to Rome, led the church there, and died there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This early agreement is super strong, historically speaking. So then the next question, how did this martyrdom actually happen? Where did it happen? We've got tradition to guide us there.
And tradition gets pretty specific, right? Rome. During Nero's reign, sometime between 64 and 67 AD, right after that massive fire in the city. A turbulent time, to say the least.
Yep, that's the commonly accepted time frame. Lines up with when Nero was really persecuting Christians. And where it happened, that's traditionally Nero's circus, or the circus of Gaius and Nero. Think big, open-air arena for chariot races, public events, all that. South of Vatican Hill, right on the Tiber River's west bank. In this spot, it's really important to note it's super close to where St. Peter's Square and the Basilica are today.
And then how Peter died, also deeply ingrained tradition, crucifixion. But there's a twist to the story, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The story, first told by Origen in the 3rd century, then by Eusebius. Peter was crucified upside down. Super symbolic, this. It's all about his humility. He felt unworthy to die like Jesus, so he asked to be crucified inverted. Powerful image, isn't it?
Really makes you think. Humility, even in the face of death. So after this, tradition says Peter was buried close by, right near the circus.
That's right. Immediate burial in a necropolis on Vatican Hill. Just a short walk uphill from the circus, maybe 100 to 150 meters. Now, back then, this wasn't a Christian cemetery. It was a pagan Roman one along the Via Cornelia. So early days, lots of persecution. Peter's burial would have been humble, probably among people of other faiths. Yeah. Not exactly a grand spectacle.
A simple, maybe even secret burial. The early Christians were in danger, after all.
For sure, they wouldn't have had their own public cemeteries. Burying Peter near where he died, even in a pagan necropolis, that was practical, to show their reverence. And over time, this grave, it became a focal point for the Christians in Rome, even if they had to be careful about it.
And then that veneration led to something more visible, the Trophy of Gaius, around 170 AD. What was this trophy exactly?
It was a marker, a monument to show where Peter was buried. Eusebius quotes this guy Gaius, a Roman presbyter from the early 3rd century. Gaius is arguing with a heretic, and he says, super confidently, I can show the trophies of the apostles. If you go to the Vatican or the Ostian Way, you'll find them. So by then, late 2nd century, everyone knew about Peter's tomb on Vatican Hill, and it was marked. Early Christians took the time to do that. How important must that have been for them?
A physical marker, centuries-old tradition, all pointing to this spot on Vatican Hill. And then enter Constantine, early 4th century, a real game changer.
Big time. Constantine legalizes Christianity in the 300s, starts all these building projects, and the biggest one, the first St. Peter's Basilica. And get this, he built it right over what they believed was Peter's tomb. They leveled parts of that old necropolis to make a solid base for this huge church.
And the high altar in that first basilica, it wasn't just placed randomly, was it?
Absolutely not. The high altar, the most sacred spot, it was intentionally put right above where they thought Peter was buried. That cemented the tradition of venerating that exact spot. It went from a simple grave in a pagan cemetery to the heart of one of the most important churches, period. And for centuries, that connection stayed strong. Think of all the pilgrimages ad limina apostolorum to the tombs of the apostles in Rome. People praying at Peter's tomb for centuries. It was that central to their faith.
Peter's burial place, literally beneath the basilica. And then think about what Jesus said. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Matthew 16:18.
Fundamental stuff for Catholics. This is where our belief in Peter as the foundation comes from, the first among the apostles. And the fact that the Basilica, the main Catholic church in Rome, is built right there, well, it connects the scriptural promise to the actual place. It's not just an idea. It's rooted in this physical spot.
The church built on the rock, literally. Now fast forward way ahead, the 1900s, excavations under Pope Pius XII. What led to those, do you think?
Well, Pope Pius XI died in 1939. In his will, he said he wanted to be buried in the Vatican grottos, as near to Peter's tomb as possible. And while they were getting his burial spot ready, workmen break through into some underground spaces. Turns out, it was the old Roman necropolis under the Basilica. Pope Pius XII, he knew how important this was, historically and spiritually, so he ordered a secret, super careful excavation. Can you imagine? Under this grand basilica, a team digging, hoping to find secrets from centuries ago.
A secret because of World War II starting up and also just out of respect for the site, right?
Exactly. The war meant things had to be discreet. Plus, you got to be careful when you're dealing with the supposed burial place of an apostle. Pope Pius XII, he was really invested in this. He called it uncovering the soil truly saturated with the blood of the Prince of the Apostles. Big words.
So who was actually doing the digging and figuring out what they found?
The main guy overseeing everything was Emisscure Ludwig Kaas. And the workers, the actual diggers, were the Sampietrini, the guys who traditionally take care of the basilica. They know their stuff. And 2 Jesuit archaeologists, Father Antonio Frua and Father Engelbert Kirschbaum, they were crucial. They kept track of everything, made sure everything was interpreted correctly.
What did they actually find down there, though? Must have been mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing is right. It was this huge, really well-preserved Roman necropolis, like a whole city for the dead, from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD. There were tons of tombs, big mausoleums, inscriptions, even frescoes, a whole ancient cemetery. And they figured out it was deliberately filled in during the 4th century when Constantine built his basilica on top.
And did they find anything that actually pointed to Peter's tomb?
You bet. At the very far end of this underground city, right under the high altar in that massive dome, They found this modest burial site, but it showed signs of early and continuous veneration. They called it the Red Wall, distinctive reddish plaster with a niche in it. And leaning against this wall, remnants of a marble edicula, like a little shrine, 2 columns, a shelf. This was huge. It matched the descriptions of the Trophy of Gaius from the late 2nd century. It's not just some random thing either. It's right under the most sacred spot in the whole basilica. That tells you something about how long that spot has been venerated.
An actual thing dug up from the ground, matching a historical account from centuries earlier. It doesn't get much better than that, does it?
Truly amazing. They dated the edicula to around 160-170 AD, based on how it was made. So, yeah, early Christians probably did mark Peter's grave with this exact monument, right on the money. And under the edicula, a simple grave, just a hole lined with bricks, nothing fancy, exactly what you'd expect for an early, humble burial. And the location, perfect. Right under the altars of Constantine's Basilica, and all the ones that came after, matches the tradition perfectly.
I remember reading about the graffiti wall, too. That was nearby, right?
Oh, yeah, the graffiti wall, Wall G, they called it, right next to the shrine area. This wall was covered in inscriptions, symbols, all scratched into the plaster. Pilgrims who came to this holy place, they left these little marks. And one of them, it caught the eye of Professor Margherita Guarducci. She was an expert on inscriptions. It said, Patasa Eni, Greek for Peter is here or Peter's within. Now, graffiti can be tricky, but this really seems like those early Christians believed they were right near Peter's tomb. Like, we're here, and so is Peter. Makes you feel connected to those early Christians, doesn't it?
So by 1950, with all this evidence, Pope Pius XII made that big announcement.
Yep, December 1950. He said, the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles has been found. No doubt about it. Centuries of tradition, belief, all confirmed. But he was careful about the bones they had found. Said none of them could be for sure said to be Peter's.
I guess that makes sense. The necropolis, it was messed with over the years. They found bones from different people, even animal bones. Hard to be 100% certain.
Exactly. Those early excavations, they showed where the tomb probably was, found the Trophy of Gaius, but
yeah,
no clear-cut skeleton of Peter. But the story doesn't end there. Professor Guarducci kept working, and her research was a whole other chapter in this amazing story.
Oh, I know about that. Her work on the graffiti and her dedication, it led to something remarkable years later. What happened?
So Professor Guarducci, she was studying those inscriptions, especially that Petrosini one. And she was more and more convinced that Peter's bones had to be somewhere near the tomb. So she asked around, had they kept any bones separately from the main dig? And get this, Emzikar Kaz, the guy in charge of the whole thing, he told one of the workers to collect some bones found in a niche near the Red Wall. Keep them safe, in case they got mixed up or something.
Those bones, they were just forgotten about.
Pretty much. Professor Guarducci, she tracked down this worker, Giovanni Sagoni. He remembered it clearly. Emzikar Kaz told him to put the bones from that niche in a wooden box, put the box in a storage cupboard in the Basilica. And that box sat there for over a decade. Nobody even thought about it. But Professor Guarducci found it, got the bones from right near Peter's traditional tomb. It's like an archaeological detective story.
Talk about a plot twist. So what did they find out when they studied those bones?
They did tests, late 1950s. The bones were from one guy, older, between 60 and 70, strong build. Sounds like Peter, right? And here's the thing. They were missing foot bones. Something this relates to the upside-down crucifixion story. Maybe his feet were left on the cross. They also found soil on the bones. It matched the soil under the shrine. And there were bits of purple and gold fabric, maybe from a burial cloth. Shows respect, right? Plus, animal bones in the niche. Maybe offerings left by pilgrims. It all says the niche hadn't been disturbed for a very long time.
Professor Guarducci, she must have been sure these were Peter's relics, and she published her findings too. But some of the original excavation guys weren't so sure, were they?
Right. Father Ferrua, he was cautious. He was worried about where the bones had been all those years, and they weren't in the main tomb itself, just a nearby niche. Plus, they'd found other bones around the necropolis. Maybe things had gotten mixed up over time. But Professor Guarducci, she argued that those specific bones, so close to the Petrosini and the Trophy of Gaius, they were probably moved to that niche on purpose, to keep them safe during Constantine's construction project in the 4th century.
Lots of research, lots of different opinions. But in the end, the church made a statement, 1968, Pope Paul VI.
A big moment. June 1968, Pope Paul VI makes what he calls a happy announcement. He says the relics of St. Peter have been identified in a manner which we can consider convincing. He talks about all the work that went into it, the archaeologists, the scholars, and he confirms the belief. These bones are the remains of Simon Bar Jonah, Peter the Apostle.
And then they were put on display in a special reliquary, a powerful symbol.
Absolutely. They chose 9 bone fragments, put them in a bronze reliquary,
Uh-huh.
and the inscription, Beati Petri Apostoli Ossa, que putantur, the bones of Blessed Peter the Apostle, which are thought to be his. Careful wording, see? Pope Paul VI, he kept this reliquary in his private chapel. That's how important it was to him. The rest of the bones went back to the Vatican Necropolis. And now you can visit the area where they are if you take a Scavi tour of the necropolis.
And in recent years, those relics have been brought out for people to see, even used as a way to show unity between different Christian groups.
Right. 2013, the year of faith, Pope Francis put the reliquary on display for everyone. And in 2019, he gave 9 bone fragments to the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, showing unity, shared roots. Powerful stuff.
So the church believes these are Peter's relics. It's hugely important to them. But they also acknowledge that there's still discussion among scholars and that science can't be 100% certain after all this time.
Absolutely. It's about faith, careful consideration, and the amazing way that archaeology, tradition, and belief all line up here. As Monsignor Rino Fisichella said, even with all the academic debate, faith, the people of God, has always believed these to be the relics of the Apostle Peter, and we continue to venerate them in this way. It's about what people believe deep down.
Because this goes beyond just facts and history, doesn't it? This is about theology, spirituality, a real tangible connection to the foundation of our faith.
You got it. It connects us to Peter, the rock. When we venerate these relics, it reminds us that the saints were real people, touched by the Holy Spirit. St. Peter's Basilica being built right on top of his supposed tomb. It shows how faith has continued, uninterrupted, since the very beginning of the Church. And for other Christian groups, it reminds us that we have the same roots, the same important figures in our history. For Catholics, it's a powerful affirmation of what they've always believed, a real personal connection to the start of it all.
So back to the question we started with. How do we know Peter is buried under the altar in St. Peter's Basilica? We looked at the hints in the Bible, the early accounts from people who lived right after Peter, the incredible Vatican Necropolis, that trophy of Gaius, the Petrus Ani writing, the bones themselves, and then the Church's tradition and official statement.
After 2,000 years, science can't give us 100% proof. But all these different pieces of evidence, they come together to create a really strong, faith-affirming picture, especially for Catholics.
Really makes you think, doesn't it? It shows how powerful faith and tradition are and how those relics, that tomb, they still impact the church today. But maybe take some time to think about it. How does knowing all this affect how you see the church, your own faith? It's a story that still resonates with us today.